after there was some indication that maybe, just maybe, these IDF soldiers would suffer some punishment for what they did, there were protests in Israel. There was rage over the notion that they would ever suffer any consequences for what they did. And later, they were made to be television stars. They were brought on interview shows, celebrated. There is a sickness in the society right now that needs to be addressed. If you see anyone being raped like that and you think the rapists should be let off with not even a slap on the wrist, there is something wrong with that society.
Okay. When a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist like Nick Kristof documents systematic sexual violence in Israeli detention centers, the instant playbook from pro-government commentators isn't to demand an investigation. It's to scream blood libel and demand the journalist be fired. But on Piers Morgan Uncensored, that exact playbook collapsed on live television. Watch how quickly a pro-Israel commentator accepts 289 pages of claims against Hamas without question, but when confronted with documented, video-recorded abuse carried out by IDF guards at Sde Teiman, her entire defense devolves into calling the footage debunked and threatening lawsuits live on air. If you're sick of selective outrage and want real receipts over narrative management, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video. I'm Neel. This is The Honest Perspective. Mainstream media loves to pretend both sides of a panel are operating in good faith until the receipts hit the table and the double standard exposes itself. Let's get into it.
I think it's very simple. Sexual violence carried out by any group of people, whether we're talking about IDF soldiers or members of Hamas, is wrong, indecent, immoral, and should be condemned. I don't know why this is such a difficult thing to do. This shouldn't be considered a one-sided thing. Okay, sexual violence is often used during war. Now, in the case of Hamas, I think the argument is whether or not Hamas used rape specifically as a tool of war, and it was a widespread act. And so that's where the debate lies on the Hamas side. On the Israeli side, Kristof was very clear in noting that there's no indication that IDF soldiers are commanded to carry out rape. But what stood out to me about his reporting is that, there were individuals quoted who said that basically no one stops them. Like it's common, it's known that this is happening, it's been happening for a long time, but no one in a position of power in Israel is stopping them from doing it. And so it's just, it's so wrong. And I don't know how anyone can read the entirety of that Kristof piece and not be brought to tears over the just cruel and unusual punishment of individuals who were never even charged with a crime, by the way. That's the other thing. These are individuals who were arrested soon after October 7th on suspicion of doing something wrong. They were never charged with anything. They never stood trial, yet they were imprisoned and raped in some of the most horrific ways imaginable. So just long story short, rape is wrong. Sexual violence is wrong, regardless of who does it.
Notice how simple the baseline principle is when Anna Kasparian states it. Rape and sexual violence are illegal, immoral, and wrong, regardless of who commits them. That shouldn't be a controversial stance. But watch what happens as soon as the panel shifts to Emily Schrader. Pay attention to how the standard instantly shifts from condemn all sexual violence to demanding a veteran journalist be fired for daring to report on Palestinian victims. Okay, Emily Schrader, welcome back to Uncensored to you too. You've posted Nick Kristof should really be fired over this. If such crimes actually occurred, there needs to be a respectable investigation into this behaviour, not an opinion column citing Hamas-affiliated sources. The NYT published an opinion column accusing Israel of systematic sexual abuse the night before a major report documenting Hamas October 7th sexual atrocities was released. Not an investigation, but an opinion piece built heavily on claims from Euromed Monitor, whose leadership has documented ties to Hamas networks. If abuse is happening, it should be investigated, but regurgitating absurd claims such as that Israel trained dogs to rape Palestinians does not help victims of sexual violence. It makes a mockery of them. Shame on the New York Times. So my first question is, I presume that you found everything in the... I don't want to speak for you, but you can clarify quickly. Did you find everything in the Hamas report credible and entirely accurate, and you would just take it unquestionably as fact?
We have no way of knowing if every single claim that's made in the Civil Commission's report is accurate. I personally, of course, have no way of knowing that. But what we do know from the Civil Commission report is that it relies on 1,800 hours of footage. It relies on more than 10,000 photos. It relies on forensic evidence that was collected from dead bodies that were there, as well as eyewitness and survivor testimony from the hostages who returned. So there is a lot more evidence that's provided in that report, which I did read in its entirety, 289 pages. In regards to the article by Kristof, my problem with it isn't that such abuses could occur or that there aren't abuses in prisons. I believe that there most certainly are, as I think there are in most countries that have a prison system, especially one involved in a heavy conflict like we see here. I think this might be the first time on Piers Morgan I actually agree with Anna Kasparian. It doesn't matter who did it. If it's happening, it's wrong. It deserves a thorough investigation. And I don't believe that Kristof did them a service in this article. I think it actually is an insult if there are indeed victims, as he described, who have been abused in the ways that he described. There needs to be a much more impartial investigation. And furthermore, the sources that he used, I mean, the way that he didn't disclose the associations between Euromed Monitor and Hamas, between what Rami Abdu has said and stood for, what the chairman of the board, Mazen Kahel, has stated. They have both explicitly supported the actions of October 7th on social media themselves. Euromed itself has been a denier of sexual assault and rape on October 7th by Hamas. So there's a lot of complications and problems that simply were not disclosed in this piece.
But what is interesting,
Emily,
Emily, here's what I would say. What is interesting to me is your mindset about these two reports, because on the first one, you conceded immediately that you don't know for sure if it's all accurate. And yet you're not calling for anyone to be fired. You're not throwing rocks at the quality of the reporting. You're just accepting you don't know it's all true, but you 100% support it and endorse it. Whereas with the Kristof report, and again, to remind viewers, this is not just any old journalist. He is one of the most experienced and highly awarded journalists in America. He's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. He didn't lob this up as a piece of opinion. As he says himself, he defended...
Sure, but the sources he relies
on... hang on, let me finish.
The sources he relies on are very different than 1,800 hours of raw footage
but he
photos
himself,
from actual dead bodies.
Okay, but he, as he says, I deeply believe the best opinion journalism is based on new reporting. So my columns are rooted in travel and reporting. In this case, I saw a story and pursued it. And because I'm a columnist, it ran in the opinion section. What was intriguing to me, and maybe you can shed some light on this, but within minutes, there was this bombardment of people on social media, high profile, Bill Ackman and others piling in to Kristof, denouncing it all as just complete nonsense, fantasy, blood libel, and so on. How could they possibly have known? In the same way that you were open and honest enough to say you don't know if everything in the Hamas report is actually correct, why did you not collectively apply the same view to what Nick Kristof did, given his background as an award-winning journalist?
Piers Morgan isn't exactly a radical progressive, but credit where it's due. He immediately catches the hypocrisy. Schrader admits live on air that she has no way of verifying every claim in the Israeli Civil Commission report, yet endorses it 100% without calling for anyone to be fired. But the moment Nick Kristof reports on Palestinian victims, backed by survivor testimony and UN findings, she calls it an opinion column relying on terrorist proxies. Now watch Part C, where Anna Kasparian brings up the actual documented video evidence of the Sde Teiman facility, and watch the response completely collapse.
Because the Civil Commission was based on evidence. It wasn't compiled by a journalist and it wasn't published in an opinion section. In fact, I would probably have been more likely to believe some of the claims that were made by Kristof if it had been done as a news article. And frankly, I think the New York Times has the resources, they have the time, they have the ability to conduct a thorough investigation about this, and they didn't. And I think that actually does a disservice to any of victims who actually have suffered from sexual harassment or abuse in captivity or otherwise. It's a huge problem journalistically. That said, I'm not denying that something could have occurred, but what? We don't really know. I mean, when you're using sources that are praising Hamas, that have affiliations with Hamas, this is incredible.
We all witnessed an IDF gang rape of a Palestinian hostage
No,
in
you
one
didn't.
of these.
You didn't
Yes, we
witness
did.
that,
I
Anna,
watched the
because
video
that's not what the
myself.
footage shows,
I watched
and that
the
actually
video
has been
myself. Don't
investigated
interrupt
in
me.
the courts.
I watched the video myself. I watched the
Anna,
video
you
myself.
interrupted me, as
We
a matter
all
of
saw
fact,
it.
and
We
what
all
you saw
it.
is not
And
what
in
you think you
fact,
saw. This
the
has already been debunked.
The victim. By the way, I just want to be clear that this woman is not a journalist. She's actually a spy who works for the 8200 group within the
By the
IDF.
way, that is
And
legal defamation. I have never worked for the Israeli government in any capacity, and I also have never served in the Israeli army.
You yourself have posted about it on X.
No, I didn't.
I have
Apparently,
a
you
screenshot.
have problems
I have
reading.
a screenshot. I have a screenshot. I'll share it immediately after this
I have a screenshot
interview.
too, Anna. In fact, I have a screenshot of you defaming me on social
go
media,
ahead and
calling
sue
me a
me.
traitor
Go
to the
ahead and sue
United
me.
States when you have no
Sue
such
me.
evidence.
You are a traitor to
So
the United
maybe
States. Go
stick
ahead and
to
sue
the
me.
actual
We all
conversation here, which is not
witnessed
about
a
my
gang
background,
rape.
All right,
but about
can we not
sexual
talk
assault
over
of
each
young
other?
people.
Witnessed it.
All right, don't
Y'all
talk.
witnessed it.
If you talk
We
over each
don't
other,
agree. Don't ever
if you
say
talk
that we
over
agree.
each
I'll
other,
never
no one
agree
can
with you.
hear. And
Yeah.
let's not get into the tit for tat on who's suing who about what. Let's stick to the story itself.
Can I finish my
the
point?
you're making is what?
The point I'm making is there was a group of IDF soldiers who were caught on surveillance footage. This is a video I watched. This is a video that many people have seen themselves. The gang rape happens, okay? The Palestinian man who suffered that sexual abuse had internal injuries that were so bad that he had to be in the hospital for weeks upon weeks, okay? They used objects to rape him anally. I mean, it was one of the most horrific things I've ever witnessed myself. And you know what happened, Piers, after there was some indication that maybe, just maybe, these IDF soldiers would suffer some punishment for what they did? There were protests in Israel. There was rage over the notion that they would ever suffer any consequences for what they did. And later, they were made to be television stars. They were brought on interview shows, celebrated. There is a sickness in the society right now that needs to be addressed. If you see anyone being raped like that and you think the rapist should be let off with not even a slap on the wrist, there is something wrong with that society.
Okay.
What you just witnessed in that exchange is the entire infrastructure of narrative defense crumbling the second it hits unassailable facts. Notice the immediate maneuver from Emily Schrader when Anna Kasparian brings up the video footage of IDF soldiers sexually abusing a detainee at the Sde Teiman facility. Schrader doesn't engage with the substance. She interrupts, claims the footage was debunked, and then pivots to alleging Anna is defaming her as an intelligence agent. It's a classic deflection tactic designed to derail the conversation away from the video footage itself. Except the Sde Teiman video was not debunked. Let's review the actual receipts that mainstream cable news panels rarely lay out in full. In July 2024, Israeli military advocate general Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi authorized the arrest of 9 IDF reservists stationed at the Sde Teiman detention camp following a medical report confirming severe, life-threatening internal injuries inflicted on a Palestinian detainee. That detainee was hospitalized with ruptured intestines and severe bodily damage resulting from severe physical and sexual abuse. In August 2024, Israeli news outlet Channel 12 obtained and aired the security camera footage from Sde Teiman. The tape clearly showed IDF soldiers taking a detainee aside, surrounding him with riot shields to block the surveillance camera's line of sight, and carrying out the assault. The footage was verified, broadcast on Israeli domestic television, and formed the basis for an ongoing investigation by military authorities. When Schrader claims live on air that what you saw is not what you think you saw, or that it was debunked in court, she is flatly misrepresenting the public record. The soldiers were detained specifically because the medical evidence and security footage were so undeniable that the military advocate general had no legal choice but to intervene. And what happened inside Israel when those arrests were made? That is the structural critique Anna Kasparian brings up, and it's the most crucial point of this entire debate. When military police arrived at Sde Teiman to arrest the suspect soldiers, far-right mobs, including members of the Israeli Knesset like Zvi Sukkot and Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu, literally stormed the military facility to prevent the arrests. Hours later, an armed crowd breached the Beit Lid military court base where the soldiers were being held. Far-right government ministers, including National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, explicitly defended the soldiers, arguing that military personnel should be immune from criminal prosecution regardless of what acts they commit against Palestinian detainees. Subsequent media appearances in Israel saw some of those same reserve soldiers invited onto primetime television programs, masked or unmasked, framed not as suspects under investigation for horrific crimes, but as national heroes being persecuted by leftist military prosecutors. That is not a fringe anomaly. It is a structural reality. When Nick Kristof published his investigative piece in the New York Times, his report wasn't relying on isolated rumors. It was detailing an established environment where oversight is systematically blocked, human rights organizations are denied entry, and perpetrators operate under functional immunity. As Shai Ben Ephraim, himself a former IDF soldier and whistleblower, noted later in this exact same debate, foreign journalists are forced to rely on survivor accounts precisely because the Israeli military authorities restrict access to detention facilities and refuse to publish independent investigative findings. When state authorities block transparent access, journalism's job is to break the seal of silence, not to wait for a state-sanctioned stamp of approval that will never come. Look at the difference in how these two reports are treated by pro-government advocates. The report detailing October 7th atrocities draws on forensic evidence, survivor interviews, and extensive footage. Progressive commentators like Anna Kasparian don't deny those atrocities. As she stated clearly in sentence 1, sexual violence is an absolute red line regardless of who commits it. But when a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter documents identical categories of abuse committed against Palestinian detainees in facilities where individuals are held for months without charge or trial, the reaction from figures like Schrader is to demand that the journalist be fired, brand the reporting as a blood libel, and claim that any Palestinian organization involved in documentation is an arm of Hamas. That asymmetry is not about defending truth, it's about protecting state power from accountability. When you strip away the shouting, the threats of litigation, and the personal attacks live on set, the core takeaway remains clear. Human rights are universal, or they mean nothing at all. If your moral framework requires you to ignore video evidence, dismiss verified medical reports, and attack award-winning reporters simply to preserve a political narrative, you aren't doing journalism. You're doing state propaganda. If you believe in holding power accountable, no matter who holds the gun, if you believe that human dignity applies to every victim regardless of their nationality, hit that subscribe button to support The Honest Perspective. I'm Neel. Truth over access, people over profits. That's The Honest Perspective, and that's where I'll leave you.